Hello, I am a storyteller. I'm a storyteller of all things historical. I like researching and writing stories of anything to do with history. And these two stories I'm going to tell you now came out of nothing particularly historical this time, but out of visits. And I'll tell you them now. The first story is about a visit to a local beauty spot in southeast London. I hope you enjoy it. Now, I've always liked old maps and photos, comparing places to then and now, imagining what places looked like 50 or even 500 years ago. I suppose that's why I like history in general so much. To my mind, a place isn't something you visit or live in or work at. It's the combined histories of all the people who've ever lived there. It doesn't matter if it's a stately home or a castle or a ruin of a cottage in the countryside. Now, I'm sure you've seen those ruins in your walks around the countryside. All that's left is just half a wall, a pile of stones, an old stone hearth. Nothing to really indicate what used to be there. But do they deserve our interest like a big dramatic castle does? Yes, they do, because people used to live there. Someone built that cottage. A couple lived in it. They made love there. Babies were born and children grew up there. They were warm there in the summer and cold there in the winter, huddling around the remains of that fireplace. They celebrated there. They laughed and cried there. They earned a living from the land around. And they went on journeys from there too. And they had homecomings there. They grew old there. They died there. The same thing happened from generation to generation until something happened. Nobody'll know what, but the cottage was left deserted. But they left their mark. The cottage itself, some names in an old census document or in a court rolls. They would have left children and grandchildren and all sorts of people now dotted around the country, not knowing that their ancestors lived in this particular cottage. They may not have left a history as a king leaves a history, but there's a story to their lives, and that place, as surely as a king has a story. I call it a sense of place. Now, I want to take you back to a day last summer that somewhat shook my faith in history and place. It was a summer Sunday afternoon. The family were busy, so I took myself and my dog out to Keston for a walk. It was an old Victorian estate, now turned into a country park, with a couple of small lakes, some woods, some meadows, and a small river. It was a popular place, but all the visitors were gathered around the lakes and the ice cream van. So the dog and I went the other way and meandered downstream into the woods. We passed the usual information board, a little bit of information on who owned the land, sketches of an old house that used to be there, now long vanished. The sketch was in dark pencil. It seemed that it was all Gothic gables looming everywhere. And the little stream was evidently once an engineered river fed by the lakes, providing rivulets and pools and waterfalls for the delight of the Victorian owners as they walked along the banks. Today, it was muddy, nearly dry, with little of the original man-made channel, and it was nearly full up with silt. We followed the path of the river, and I came across the remains of the Victorian garden. some bricks from old walls, bits of steps, sections of old brick paths. It was a warm, sunny day, the trees and the sun providing warm, dappled light. There was the bright blue of the sky high above, and the thick leaves and branches of the trees overhanging. A warm breeze was rustling the leaves. You could hear the lazy drone of insects, the occasional knocking of a woodpecker, and the sum of planes high in the sky flying to and from Biggin Hill Airport. The dog and I circled back around the hot meadows, and I felt the urge to retrace my steps back up the path following the stream to see what else I could see of the engineering and try and imagine how the whole thing might have looked and worked. I found a path that led back towards the stream and into the woods, and I found myself on the other side of the stream to where I was before, and the path turned and led up the bank of the river into some deep shade from the trees above. I hadn't remembered seeing this bit before from the other side of the stream. I was rather surprised because it seemed in rather better condition than the rest, both the path and the bank of the river. It must have been the shade playing tricks, or possibly another part of the stream I hadn't walked past yet. I even found a slightly overgrown stone bench. I sat on that bench and watched the dog playing in the little water that was left in the stream. The dog was happy cooling his paws, and I was surrounded in a little bubble of content. The bench was old but comfortable, and it was quiet too, apart from the buzz of the insects and the breeze in the leaves and the odd plane. Even those sounded muffled and distant now. It was warm without being scorching or oppressive, and the breeze was warm but comforting. I was able to lean back too on an old tree trunk. All I needed was a book and a glass of wine. As it was, I had a bottle of water and my smartphone. I took a mouthful of tepid water and switched my phone on. Not much happening on Facebook, not much happening on Twitter, and nobody had sent me any emails. I didn't know whether to be happy or not having anything to respond to. I leant back and half closed my eyes. I started thinking about what this place might have looked like in Victorian times, and in my mind's eye the shadow of the stream bank firmed up, as did the path along it. I remembered the sketch of the house, and in my mind's eye I built the house out of the dark overhanging shadows of the trees and the branches. I thought through my half-closed eyes, the details filling out in the shadows. Window frames and doors appeared, and it seemed like light shone through them, the sunlight through the tree branches. I populated my little picture with a couple and turned it into a movie. They were walking arm in arm along the edge of the stream, her in a beautifully patterned bell-shaped dress and matching bonnet, him in a frock coat, tight trousers and top hat. There was a dog too, some sort of small terrier. I idly wondered what they might be talking about, and I wondered what the dog was called. I added some new sounds. I heard talking, the couple chattering away animatedly in the sun, a dog panting eagerly and yapping, a horse neighing in the background, and the sound of a child playing in the stream, with laughter, shouts and splashing. I heard the sound of water running. The air took on a cooler edge like it does close to water in damp woodland. I saw a woman A servant or a nanny, judging by her dress, walking up the path by the stream, waving happily at the child that was just out of sight. The sun shone, making the moving waters of the river sparkle, and the spray off a small waterfall caught the light and formed a small, perfect rainbow. I could smell heady perfumes from a well-stocked garden, the wisteria growing up over the frontage of the house. I could smell lavender, roses, and other delicious scents I couldn't place. The black shapes of the trees and the branches from which I had recreated the old house slowly blossomed with their original colours. The dark grey slates of the roof, the dark red bricks of the walls, highlighted by cream bricks forming cornices and window reveals. The dark leaves of the trees slowly gave way to lighter leaves of shrubbery and flowers. There were splashes of red roses, washes of purple lavender, the red and pink and yellow of wisteria flowers looking like heavy, rich bunches of grapes on a vine. The clothes of my puppets took on their own colours too. The lady had a blue and white pattern dress with a pink bonnet, and the gentleman's suit and hat was charcoal grey, but with a glorious maroon waistcoat and gold watch chain that shone in the sun. Bright shafts of light bathed the area in a warm, bright glow. The sun shone from a sublime duck-egg blue sky, devoid of any clouds. I enjoyed the experience of this movie that I was creating. I remembered thinking I ought not to fall asleep, but the conditions were perfect for making me feel drowsy. I stretched my legs out, adjusting my back on the tree behind me. It felt like the back rest of a chair, not a tree. I was warm, and the seat was feeling even more comfortable, like a garden chair. And I let my imagination flow. My feet felt more constrained in ankle-length leather black button boots. My legs were warm in needle-striped tight trousers. A cravat knot was pressing under my chin, and a tight high-waisted jacket felt strange under my armpits. And the rim of a hat with a substantial hatband restricted my view of the sky above. I watched the couple chat arm in arm, perambulating around their gardens. The child, I could hear, was still playing in the stream, the nanny watching indulgently. A servant came into view, carrying a small table, and another laid a silver tea service. 2 garden chairs were fetched. Tea was poured. I watched the steam rise out of the cups. The boy was called with a promise of a cream cake. He ran up wet and laughing and grabbed a cake and stuffed it in his mouth. Cream covered his face. His nanny scolds him for his mess and his bad manners, and he runs off giggling with the remainder of the cake. His parents smile indulgently, watching him go. They continue with their high tea most mannerly. Cake daintily consumed with a cake fork. Tea drunk with cocked fingers from china cups, with the sun shining through the fine porcelain. A servant was fussing around them. The boys' laughs and splashes echo off the house and the trees. They seemed to have scared off the birds. There was no sound other than the boy, the stream, and his parents and nanny beseeching him to take care. There was a child's scream, quickly cut off, then a woman's, longer and more urgent. I sat up, watching. The parents, instead of rushing, both turned and looked slowly at me with black eyes. cake forks halfway to their mouths. There was a longer, more dreadful scream. I got up and ran clumsily in the unfamiliar shoes. The nanny was looking down into the stream, one hand to her mouth. There seemed to be quite a deep pool. I jumped in, the water to my waist, the current strong. I felt around under water. There was nothing. Reaching deeper, I took a deep breath then and ducked under the water. My face was aching with the cold, my hat washed off. I felt a small hand and I started pulling. My other hand found the other small hand. Suddenly they held me in terrific force, crushing my bones. A white, skull-like face appeared, mouth open like a scream. My knees scraped the bottom of the river. My breath was gone. My lungs were aching. Somehow I was being drawn deeper and deeper into the river, the skull face filling my mind. My last thought was to scream. I opened my mouth and the cold water rushed in, filling my lungs, achingly cold, my body racked in pain, the skull melting into a haze. I was on my knees in some soft, dry silt on the riverbed, a pint of water pouring out of my lungs. My shorts, t-shirt and sandals were soaked in bitterly cold water. I was shivering uncontrollably as the hot sun shone down on me. The dog looked at me, head cocked to one side, tail hesitantly wagging. I knelt up, stroking his dry, warm head. I staggered to my feet and stepped out of the shallow, dry stream bed and started walking back to the car. On the way up, I saw a figure in the dark shadows of a rhododendron bush. I thought I heard the words, "next time," but I couldn't be sure. The next story is about a trip to the pub, an ordinary trip to the pub, this time with some rather strange consequences. It was the early part of autumn, and the wind howled outside. The creaking sound of the old tree shaking its leaves and bending in the wind could be heard over the wind. The rain and the hail hammered against the windows on all sides of the building. A whistle of varying pitch could be heard as the wind insinuated itself into the gaps around the sash windows and the door. The wind could also be heard in the chimney, alternately drawing on the fire and then a backdraft pushing smoke in curling fingers up and around the chimney breast, reaching up to the mantelpiece and adding to the aged marks on the stone above the hearth. The catch on the front door rattled intermittently, as if someone was outside but only half-heartedly wanted to come in. It was not a time to be out, and in fact there were only 3 people in the bar that night. The landlord was idly polishing glasses, leaning into a comfortable corner of the bar. Old John, the coal merchant, was playing darts by himself, and I was sitting on a settle with my back to the door, trying to dry my boots by the fireplace. Now, it isn't a good pub unless there's a really good fire in winter. And this was exactly the right night for it. It was a proper coal fire too. Not a coke fire or a wood fire or a smokeless fuel fire, but a proper old-fashioned anthracite coal fire. real coal, smooth pieces of coal shining like jewels among the flames. The fire in between glowed like molten lava, smoke curling from in between. Dark red and blue and green flames flickered. There was the occasional hiss of gas suddenly escaping from a piece of coal with a corkscrew of smoke or flame as it caught fire. Now these fires had been a feature of my childhood in my parents' and my grandparents' houses. As I slowly drank my pint, I stared into the fire. The fire drew me into its depths. There was the fascination in the sounds and colours and smells and shapes, the mystery of its pulsing life, the memories of time spent as a child doing the very same thing, the comfort and safety of its warmth and sound and smell wrapped itself around me. It was peaceful too. The landlord didn't believe in TV or music or bleeping one-armed bandits. Thank heaven. What other reason was for me to be there other than to enjoy the fire and a good pint of bitter? I was warm. It seemed to be a naughty luxury to be inside whilst the storm carried on its business out. The only sound was the storm and the fire and the occasional knock of John's darts hitting the target. No vehicles drove past. There were going to be no other customers that evening. I was dropping off in the heat and the comfort. Then suddenly there was a faint sound of horses' hooves on the road. Surely no one was out on a horse in this weather. Was it a dream? No. There it was again. Despite the sound of the storm, the hoofbeats were very clear but faint, obviously a long way off. Then I could hear a second horse, again clear but distant. John stopped his darts and looked at the landlord, and he in turn stood upright, frowning. All three of us looked towards the door. The sound was almost hypnotic. I had no idea of time, no idea how long it took the horses to arrive outside. The outside floodlights came on automatically, and through the rain-streaked glass we could see two horses, their riders hooded and motionless black shapes, seemingly staring in through the uncurtained windows. And the floodlight seemed to fuse, and it went dark again outside. The door catch clicked, and the wind crashed the door open. Rain splattered onto the floor. A tall figure in a black hooded cloak came in, dripping water. It walked to the bar, and seemingly without talking had the barman serve him a whiskey. A second figure came in, again hooded and cloaked. This cloak was grey and dirty, and as he walked the cloak trailed along the floor, leaving a wet trail on the tiles. The water in this trail seemed to attract the light, and it showed iridescent rainbow colours that seemed to writhe on the floor of their own accord, like oil on the top of water. This figure walked slowly to the fire and stood directly in front of it, inches from my feet. He stares into the motionless fire. Seemingly without there being a draught, the flame slowly licked out towards him, and the smoke from the fire began to curl round the figure. Steam joined the smoke as the heat got into his cloak, and it corkscrewed around the still silent figure, disappearing into his deep hood. We stared at the two figures. The one at the bar held his glass in white, seemingly skeletal figures. The one next to me, his hood staring at the fire, suddenly seemed to take a deep breath. Steam and smoke and then long flames from the fire spiraled around him, disappearing into the hood. And then, in an eruption of cinders and a roar, the fire itself blazed as it followed the smoke into the hood. The other put his glass on the counter, and they both walked to the door. There was no sound other than the slowly retreating sound of the horse's hooves. The fireplace was absolutely empty of fire. The next day, John gave up his coal business and became a very successful seller of solar panels. I invested all my savings and my pension in renewable energies, and the barman invested in a biomass heating system for his pub. I still remember with love and a little regret watching those coal fires. But we realized we had met two of the horsemen of the apocalypse. Death, luckily on his way to meet someone else, and a recent addition to that particular stable, pollution. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed them.